Hey there, youth and youth families, and welcome back to this time of Table Talk where we are talking about solitude, a spiritual discipline that allows us to step back from our relationships with others, get alone, and assess our relationships with ourselves, with others. And today we're going to talk about our relationship with God, probably one of the most important relationships that we have. But you know, as I'm thinking about it, those other relationships, they kind of all blend together. And if we're not seeing our relationship with ourselves and with others well, it's really hard to see God in an accurate light as well. So something to keep in mind. A reminder, we're talking about Luke chapter 10, verse 27, where it says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." So let's talk a little bit about that. You know, we talked about our relationships with others, and we talked about the first building block was doing things together, the physical, playing together. You remember we talked a little bit about. So how does that sort of, connect with connecting with God? Well, if you read in the book of James has a lot to say about how faith without works isn't really faith at all, because we have to do stuff in order to kind of cultivate this relationship. Just like we play together with other people, our service times is kind of our play time with God. I find that the people that become the most critical of church and faith and the people that are discontent with those things are often the same people who are disconnected from acts of service. They're the people that come to church to consume what's there rather than to get involved and to give. Naturally, that's because, the physical elements of serving God is a big part of our connecting with relationship with God. So how do we do this? How do we build this physical connection with God? Well, I don't think it needs to be super complicated. Just think, where do you see God doing something? Where do you see God present? And ask yourself the question, where do I see him working? And what can I do to just get involved there? If you were to just take that simple step, you're going to get moving on this whole connecting with God through service sort of thing. If you want to see your relationship with God grow, service is a great place to start. And it's going to be an important part of the process. Maybe you've heard a little bit, though, about like spiritual gifts. And you've heard that that's really important, an important part of learning where to serve God effectively. And it's true, that is a really important element, and we can talk about that together at another time. But I do want to encourage you with this. If you don't have a lot of knowledge about what your spiritual gifts might be, you know what? Just get started with something. Grab a broom or volunteer for something. Just look around to see where God is at work and get involved there. So I want you just to think about this assessment question. When you're thinking about this way to connect with God, where are you involved with serving God? Maybe if you can't answer that one, where would you like to be involved in serving God? And what step could you take to get moving forward in that? All right, next, let's talk about connecting with God with our mind, all right? Now, if you want more instruction on this one, all you need to do is rewind a couple sessions and look into our sessions on Bible study. The Bible contains so much truth that can shape our thoughts and connect our minds to God. The trouble is, so many of us really neglect this spiritual discipline in our life. I know even I have a tough time putting focused time into studying the Bible because it's hard. It takes some discipline. Sometimes Bible study can be confusing. It can take a lot of effort. However, it is so rewarding when you get this element of your relationship with God kicked into high gear. So question for you. What are you going to do in terms of upping your Bible study game? As you're assessing how you connect with God with your mind, in what way could you maybe take some of the time that is less focused on God and use it to build this element of your relationship with him? All right, next question. What does it mean to love the Lord your God with all of your heart? That's a good question. In my experience, I find that we have a tough time understanding our own emotions and how we connect with others and ourselves. And it can be kind of tough to visualize how we connect with our emotions with an invisible God. So a God that we can't see. However, the more that we trust God with kind of the deep parts of our hearts, and as we become more confident that he's okay, even with our intense feelings, like you read through the book of Psalms and you see how David, a man who was described as a man after God's own heart, the intense things that he shared with God, you know, those things really brought him closer. The more that we can just really reveal the deep parts of our heart to God, the greater closeness we experience with him. Personally, I find that most of these heart connection times for me is when I am most engaged in a focused prayer time and meditation time, and even more specifically in times of worship. You might want to, if this is an element of your life that you realize your connection with God, you need to pour some more into the heart tank. You might go and brush up on some of these spiritual disciplines as well. Finally, the last thing in connecting with God, we want to talk about how do we connect with God in terms of the soul? What do we put into the soul tank to cultivate a richer relationship with God, with our soul? I've heard this great quote one time, and I think I made reference to it in an earlier video. One of the great mistakes that we make as humans is we often think of ourselves as physical beings, this shell, we think this is us, and that we're searching for a deeper spiritual experience. But the reality is we're actually spiritual beings. We are eternal beings. We're going to spend eternity either with God or apart from God, and we are only having a very temporary physical experience. This stuff, what we see here, is only for a short period of time in comparison. Now, when you just recontextualize that is actually who you are, that you're actually a spiritual being having a physical experience rather than a physical being looking for a spiritual experience, can you see how much that would change the perspective that we might have on having a relationship with God, recognizing that this tank needs to be filled up? When we recognize that our eyes should be more on the spiritual elements of life rather than the physical, life really starts to make sense. So I want to ask you this: how are you doing with your spiritual perspective? Do you think of yourself primarily as a physical being and most of your thoughts are on the physical elements of life? Or when you think about things, do you think about them on the spiritual sense? You might want to take a little bit of time in your times of solitude just to wrestle with some of those things. And if you ever have questions on this, reach out to your small group leaders, talk to your parents, talk to me. We would love to walk with you in this. I pray blessing on this time of solitude that you're having. You know what? I'd love to hear about what kinds of things God is teaching you in this time of solitude. Feel free to reach out, and blessings on your day.